I want you to imagine the single object you value most in this entire world. Like, really think about it right now.
Oh, that's a heavy way to start.
Right. But just, picture it. Maybe it's I don't know, a vintage watch passed down from your grandfather.
Or maybe like a rare guitar you saved up a decade to buy.
Yeah, exactly. Or a piece of art that just anchors your entire home. Picture the literal weight of it in your hands.
Got it.
Now, I want you to imagine packing that exact object into a cardboard box, walking outside, and just handing it to a complete stranger. Today. Forever.
Man, just thinking about that makes my chest tight.
Yes. What happens to your chest in that exact second, that panic you are feeling right now, that tightening in your throat, and the immediate barrage of excuses your brain is throwing up to protect that object?
Oh, the brain immediately starts bargaining.
It totally does. And that is the exact target of today's deep dive. We are exploring this fascinating, honestly, intensely challenging text by Payson and Tara Wong.
Right, titled 10 Practices for Spiritual Growth.
Yes. And I want to set the stakes immediately for you guys listening, because this is not a list of cute morning routines.
No, definitely not.
It is not a productivity hack. It is a roadmap for a complete structural demolition of the human ego.
Which is such a wild concept, because the author frames this entire journey around a very stark, almost biological distinction.
How so?
Well, he introduces two concepts early on that really define the stakes of our whole existence. There is the Puthushan.
Puthushan, right.
Yeah, which basically translates to the ordinary person. I mean, this is our default factory setting.
The baseline human experience.
Exactly. The ordinary person is, driven by cravings, totally defined by their possessions, paralyzed by their enemies.
Just constantly suffocating under the weight of their own fabricated identity.
Right. And the entire goal of this text is to outline the excruciating process of letting that ordinary self die.
Die while you're still alive, basically.
Yeah. So you can become an Aryachan, which is an awakened or a noble person.
In Enter Wong, he really doesn't pull his punches about our starting point either.
Not at all.
He asserts that humans are uniquely burdened with his capacity for conscious development.
Yeah.
Like, he explicitly points out that we are not pigs or dogs or crows or chickens.
Because those creatures operate purely on instinct.
Right. Exactly. I mean, a crow doesn't wake up on a Tuesday and decide to dismantle its ego.
No, its nature is totally fixed.
Right. But we have this terrifying freedom to choose. And the tragedy, at least according to this text, is not that we are born as the ordinary Puthushan.
Right, because we all start there.
Right. The tragedy is that we fiercely defend that ordinary nature when we possess the sheer evolutionary power to transcend it.
We defend our prison because, honestly, we've convinced ourselves it's a castle.
Oh, wow. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like we polish the bars, we hang expensive artwork on the cell walls, and we call it a successful life.
And Tara Wong's roadmap is designed to force you out of that cell.
But he doesn't ease you into the process.
No. There's no training wheels.
Oh, right. He doesn't suggest starting with, 5 minutes of deep breathing or journaling. He attacks the load-bearing pillars of the ego immediately.
Which brings us back to that visceral panic I was talking about a minute ago.
The feeling of losing your most prized possession.
Yes. That is exactly where the author demands you begin. Point 1.
The ultimate purge.
The ultimate purge. The instruction is literally to give away your absolute favorite, most prized possession to an appropriate person.
And it has to be the favorite.
Yeah. And when I first read this, my modern consumer-trained brain immediately started trying to find a loophole.
Oh, of course.
I was like, well, I can give away the sweater I haven't worn in 3 years. I can donate a big box of old books.
I'm very generous with things I don't want anymore.
Right. But Tara Wong specifically targets the ultimate collector's item. The thing you hoard the absolute most.
Because giving away that prized possession feels like pulling the Jenga block at the very bottom of the tower.
Yes. Won't our entire sense of security just completely collapse? Why trigger such a massive psychological meltdown right out of the gate?
Because the ego uses that specific object as its primary proof of existence in the material world.
Wait, unpack that for me. Proof of existence.
Yeah. So to understand the mechanism here, look at how the human brain maps ownership.
Okay.
Psychologists call it the endowment effect, but neuroscientists actually take it a step further.
Right. I've read a bit about this.
When you value an object highly, your brain literally maps that object as an extension of your physical body.
Wait, really? Like a limb?
Exactly like a limb. If someone scratches your brand new car, your brain registers the exact same neural pathways as if someone had physically struck your arm.
Oh, wow. That explains so much road rage, honestly.
Right. So by voluntarily giving away the absolute top-tier item, you are essentially amputating a limb of your ego.
You were forcing the operating system to crash because it just cannot process voluntary loss of that magnitude.
And Intara Wong calls this resulting internal chaos the vibration of the mind.
The vibration of the mind. I like that.
He wants you to intentionally trigger that massive physiological panic. The racing heart, the flush of heat, the desperate justifications.
And then what? Just freak out?
No, then you just sit there and observe it.
Oh, brutal.
You watch your own mind throw a massive tantrum over a piece of metal or wood.
Because that observation exposes the fundamental lie of the ordinary person, right?
Exactly. The lie that the object ever had any intrinsic power.
Right. Your mind was simply generating an emotional reality and projecting it onto an inanimate object.
And once you survive that initial crash, something really profound shifts.
Because if you can hand over the heirloom watch and wake up the next day realizing you are still alive,
still breathing, fundamentally unharmed,
the spell is completely broken.
Yeah. Letting go of a spare television or a winter jacket suddenly feels entirely frictionless.
You have already done the absolute hardest rep in the gym.
Exactly.
But, and this is what terrifies me, Intara Wong takes this exact same mechanism of forced detachment and applies it to our abstract ambitions next.
Oh, yeah. Point 2.
He advises us to explicitly play with our deep desires by rejecting benefits, fame, and money.
Notice the specific phrasing he uses there, though.
Play with our deep desires.
Yes. This isn't about miserable, white-knuckled self-deprivation.
It's not about just punishing yourself.
Right. It implies a sense of lightness, a sort of scientific curiosity. He is asking you to treat your ambitions as a laboratory experiment.
Testing the hypothesis that society's ultimate rewards are actually just invisible chains.
Exactly.
Let's apply this to, like, your actual life.
Yeah.
You're sitting in a Tuesday morning meeting and your boss offers you a massive promotion.
The dream scenario for the ordinary person.
Right. It comes with a title bump, way more money, a huge hit of prestige. Society's default programming dictates that you take it, celebrate it, and let it inflate your sense of self-worth.
But Intara Wong is asking you to imagine turning down that promotion.
Or completely deflecting a massive wave of public praise, purely as an exercise in testing your own detachment.
Because by periodically practicing that kind of rejection, you rise above environmental leverage.
Environmental leverage.
Yeah.
I mean, the world controls the ordinary Pudashan entirely through a system of carrots and sticks, right?
Exactly. They wave the carrot of a bonus or the carrot of public adoration, and you run on the treadmill to get it.
We all run on it.
But when you intentionally reject the carrot, you break the mechanism of control.
You achieve true, independent freedom because the environment no longer possesses the currency required to buy your behavior.
You become entirely unbribable by the universe.
Man. So, okay, we have severed the external anchors. The prize watch is gone, the promotion has been rejected, the applause has been ignored.
The ego has been starved of its physical and social currency.
But the ego is incredibly resilient, isn't it?
Oh, it's like a virus. It mutates.
Right. If it can no longer attach to external validations, it just retreats inward. It burrows down into our biology.
And this introduces a completely different battleground for part 2 of the roadmap.
Because we have to confront the inescapable machinery of our own bodies, specifically what goes in and what comes out.
Escaping external ambition is one thing, but you still have to fuel the biological machine.
You literally still have to eat to survive.
Right. And therefore, food becomes the most insidious hiding place for our unevolved nature.
So what does Intara Wong say about food? Point 3, right?
Point 3. His instruction regarding food is blunt. Eat less. Do not indulge the mouth.
Wow. Simple but painful.
Very. He observes that the entire world uses food as an emotional reward system.
We totally pathologize hunger. I mean, the modern world treats a slightly empty stomach as a medical emergency that must be medicated with a snack immediately.
Oh, absolutely.
You have a stressful day at work, you self-soothe with takeout, you finish a hard project, you reward yourself with a heavy dessert.
We use flavor and fullness to numb our daily anxieties.
But Intara Wong demands the opposite. He tells us to deliberately allow ourselves to feel hungry.
And not just feel it, but to observe the rise and fall of that hunger.
Why, though? What does sitting there with a growling stomach actually achieve?
When you sit with the physical sensation of an empty stomach, rather than rushing to extinguish it, you are forced to observe the suffering inherent in the body's impermanence.
Okay, I want to make sure we really grasp that phrase. the suffering inherent in impermanence.
It's a big concept.
Yeah, on a cellular experiential level, what does that actually mean when you, the listener, are sitting on your couch listening to your stomach growl?
It means confronting the reality that you are tethered to a decaying biological engine.
A decaying engine that is so grim but true.
The human body is a relentless furnace that constantly burns fuel and constantly degrades. When you feel that gnawing sensation of hunger, you are feeling the machinery demanding maintenance.
And if you just mindlessly throw a handful of crackers down your throat the second you feel a twinge.
And you remain blind to your own servitude. You remain a slave to the cycle of decay and consumption.
Wow, so sitting with the hunger forces a shift in consciousness.
Exactly. You transition from dining for entertainment or emotional comfort to consuming purely for the utility of sustaining life.
It violently strips all the romance out of the culinary experience.
It really does.
You realize you aren't some sophisticated connoisseur, you are just an organism attempting to stave off entropy.
That's a great way to phrase it.
And if mastering food is about taking manual control of the intake valve, Inturawong applies that same ruthless scrutiny to the exhaust valve, doesn't he?
Point 4. He demands we take complete control over what comes out of us.
Speech.
He introduces the high virtue of silence.
This is perhaps the most friction-heavy practice for anyone living in the modern, hyper-connected world.
Oh, without a doubt.
The mandate is to speak only what is necessary, true, and useful.
Filtering out lies is basically the entry fee for morality. Everyone knows you shouldn't lie.
Right, that's baseline. But the author introduces a profoundly difficult secondary filter.
Yes. You must avoid saying things that are entirely true, but completely useless.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because we treat speaking as a default setting, much like breathing.
It's just an ambient noise we generate to fill the silence.
Exactly. You walk into an elevator, see a neighbor, and automatically complain about the traffic or the weather. It is just a social reflex.
But Inturawong is asking us to flip the switch from automatic to manual.
We have to hold every single thought at the gate of our teeth and interrogate its utility.
And if you think about the sheer volume of daily communication that passes the truth test but utterly fails the utility test.
Oh, it's staggering.
You text a friend to complain about a celebrity's outfit.
True, but useless.
You leave a cynical comment on a news article. You offer an unsolicited critique of a movie to a coworker.
Every single one of those statements might be factually accurate, but they serve absolutely no functional, structural, or spiritual purpose.
They are just dead weight.
Honestly, if I had to pass my daily texts and Slack messages through the "is this actually useful" filter, I would probably reduce my communication by 90%.
Most of us would.
The silence would be deafening.
Which is exactly the environment the author wants to create in your mind.
Why? What happens in that silence?
The text asserts that when we severely restrict our speech, we finally begin to hear the surging rhythm of our own ego.
Because why do we feel the burning compulsion to share useless truths in the first place?
Exactly. It is almost always the ego demanding to be acknowledged.
The ego screams, "I have an opinion. Validate my observation. Confirm my existence."
Right. And when you clamp down on that exhaust valve, the pressure builds. You feel the physical discomfort of an unexpressed opinion.
Oh, that burning need to just say, "I told you so."
Yes. The ability to endure that discomfort, to let a thought die unspoken simply because it lacks utility, is considered a high virtue that very few people ever achieve.
Because when you stop filling the air with useless opinions, you start noticing the space between yourself and other people.
And that space is almost always filled with friction.
So mastering your own speech naturally forces you to confront how you relate to the people around you.
Especially the ones who trigger that surging rhythm of the ego.
Right, which leads us to part 3, ego and enemies, point 5.
Interpersonal conflict is the ego's favorite playground.
We define our own goodness by constructing a binary opposition to someone else's perceived badness.
The ordinary Polishon literally requires enemies to triangulate their own moral superiority.
Wow, we need villains so we can be heroes.
Inturawong understands that to dismantle the ordinary mind, he must completely invert how we process hostility.
And he does this through an instruction that feels almost alchemical. He says, "Do good to those you dislike."
And he doesn't just offer this as a vague platitude.
No, he outlines 3 guaranteed, observable phenomena that will occur when you force yourself to serve an enemy.
The first phenomenon is intensely physical.
He states that you will feel an inner heat.
Yes. If you extend kindness to someone you actively despise and they react poorly,
Like maybe they sneer at you mock your effort, or reject your help entirely.
Your mind will thrash around, and he uses this great phrase like being splashed with hot water.
That metaphor of hot water is incredibly precise.
It perfectly captures the violent indignation of the ego.
Right, because you forced yourself to be the bigger person, you swallowed your pride, extended an olive branch, and they just slapped it out of your hand.
In that moment, your ego absolutely screams for justice. It demands retaliation.
But by intentionally walking into that exact scenario, you are provoking the ego's defense mechanism so you can study it under a microscope.
It is like deliberately stepping on a bear trap just to observe the speed of the springs.
You are trapping your own righteousness.
And enduring that initial shock leads directly to the second phenomenon.
Right. Once the scalding sensation of that hot water subsides, what happens?
The text guarantees a profound realization. Your dislike was heavily subsidized by your own mental fabrication.
You will see that the enemy is not the one-dimensional cartoon villain you required them to be.
We build these elaborate caricatures of the people we hate.
We totally do. We strip them of their context, their trauma, and their humanity, reducing them to purely malicious actors just to make our own narrative cleaner.
We build a villain so we get to star as the hero, exactly like you said.
But acting with unmerited kindness shatters that narrative.
You begin to see their confusion, their defensiveness, their own suffering. You see the machinery of their ego reacting to the machinery of yours.
And this leads to the third phenomenon, which is the reward, I guess.
Yes. Regardless of whether they ever understand your kindness, or accept it, or reject it entirely, a profound inner joy will bloom in your heart.
Because you drop the rock.
You drop the rock.
You realize you were the one carrying the massive, heavy boulder of hatred, exhausting your own energy to keep it elevated. When you do good to them, you just set the rock down.
The author arrives at a breathtaking conclusion here.
Which is?
If you can perform the alchemy of doing good to someone you genuinely hate, loving the rest of the world becomes incredibly easy.
Oh, for sure. You have conquered the absolute hardest interpersonal dynamic possible.
Loving your family, tolerating a stranger, or being patient with a friend becomes frictionless by comparison.
But Intara Wong pushes this interpersonal vulnerability even further. Loving an enemy requires internal shifting, but his next practice, point 6, requires a terrifying public execution of your own pride.
Oh, this one is tough.
He instructs the reader to announce your own flaws and to loudly announce the good traits of others.
Let's look at the sheer terror of trying to execute this in the real world.
Yes, because what does this mean for you, the listener? Imagine sitting in a performance review at work or a meeting with your peers.
Okay, picturing it.
You proactively praise the toxic, highly competitive coworker who has been actively gunning for your job. Then you turn around and broadcast every single tactical mistake you made that quarter. In our modern hyper-competitive society, that is career suicide.
It seems like it.
You are voluntarily handing live ammunition to your competitors.
From the perspective of the ordinary person, it is absolutely suicidal. You are abandoning every defensive perimeter you have spent your life building.
So why do it?
The author introduces a deeply resonant cultural metaphor to explain the necessity of this act. He compares our social identities to wearing a con mask.
A con mask. Let's break down what that actually is physically and psychologically for those who don't know.
Con is a highly stylized, traditional Thai masked dance drama.
Okay.
The performers wear these magnificent, elaborate, incredibly rigid masks that cover their entire heads.
Right.
When a dancer puts on the mask of a demon, they must embody the demon. When they put on the mask of a monkey god, they become the monkey god.
Their entire public existence is defined by the painted expression on the outside.
But underneath that beautiful exterior, the actual human face is hidden in the dark. It is suffocating, sweating, and straining to breathe under the heavy weight of the performance.
That is a staggering analogy for modern corporate or social life.
Isn't it?
We're all walking around suffocating under our con masks.
We spend immense amounts of energy managing the mask. You have your flawless parent mask, your infallible leader mask, your stoic partner mask.
We hide our flaws so the paint doesn't crack.
And we diminish the achievements of others so our mask shines the brightest in the room.
So Intara Wong's instruction to announce your flaws is basically a mandate to reach up, grab the mask, and just rip it off your own head in public.
Yes, because the paradoxical power of vulnerability is that if you broadcast your own flaws, nobody can ever use them against you.
Wow. If you own your incompetence, your jealousy, your mistakes, you disarm the entire social hierarchy.
You destroy the illusion of perfection before anyone else can threaten it.
And by announcing the good in others,
You dismantle the architecture of your own envy. You stop suffocating under the heavy, exhausting weight of a fabricated identity.
you trade the fragile illusion of perfection for the indestructible reality of freedom.
Precisely.
So, if we take stock of where we are on this roadmap,
We've covered a lot of ground.
we really have. We have amputated our prized possessions. We have starved the ego by observing our biological hunger rather than medicating it with food. We have strangled our useless speech.
We are actively serving the people we despise.
And we have ripped off our social masks by broadcasting our worst flaws.
Mm-hmm.
The ego has been driven out of the social and interpersonal realms.
It is absolutely nowhere to hide socially.
And this prepares us to confront part 4, the heavy, grinding friction of the physical world itself. We have to learn how to find the profound and the pathetic.
This is where the training camp moves from the realm of the psychological into the gritty, physical reality of daily labor. Point 7.
The joy of the filthy.
Yes. The author commands the reader to seek out the lowest, dirtiest, most hated jobs and to execute them with joy.
You know, it is incredibly easy to feel spiritually evolved when you are sitting on a plush cushion in a temperature-controlled room, burning expensive incense and listening to a guided meditation.
Oh, anyone can be zen in a spa.
Right. But it is an entirely different universe when you are on your hands and knees scrubbing human waste out of a public toilet.
And that contrast is precisely the point. The ego attaches itself deeply to the hierarchy of labor and status.
We internalize the belief that our value is tied to the cleanliness and prestige of our tasks.
We think, I have a master's degree. I am too important to take out the trash. Or, I am a manager. I shouldn't have to sweep the floor.
The ego violently resists tasks it deems beneath its fabricated rank.
But Interawong promises that if you can shatter that resistance, if you can cheerfully do the work that the rest of the world despises, there is no job on the planet you cannot master.
It completely annihilates the hierarchy of labor in your mind.
Because when you remove the demand for status, the mind begins to engage with the work purely for the work.
You are no longer scrubbing the floor to gain praise, because there is literally no praise in scrubbing a floor.
You are forced to live entirely in the mechanics of the present moment.
You feel the temperature of the water, you observe the friction of the brush, you watch the dirt dissolve.
You experience pure, unadulterated action without the heavy, miserable overlay of ego-driven judgment.
The external task remains gritty and unpleasant, but your internal relationship to it is completely frictionless.
Exactly.
But Interawong pushes this concept of engaging with the physical world even deeper in point 8.
Because scrubbing a floor is still a dynamic activity.
Right, there's a goal.
Yeah.
In his next practice, he demands we find absolute novelty in the most static, mundane actions imaginable.
Walking, sitting, and sleeping.
He insists that these are not repetitive actions to be endured, but entirely fresh experiences to be discovered.
To understand how radical this is, we have to look at how modern neuroscience views habituation.
Okay, let's get into the science of boredom.
Our brains are hardwired to filter out repetitive stimuli to conserve energy.
Like how if an air conditioner is humming in the room, after 5 minutes, your brain simply mutes the sound.
Precisely. And we do the exact same thing with our physical existence. We treat sitting, walking, and breathing as blank, loading screens in a video game.
We just go numb and wait for the important parts of our day to start.
And because of that numbness, we are constantly trying to gamify boredom.
Oh man. We usually look for extreme sports, exotic vacations, or fabricated challenges for a thrill, right?
Yeah, like running an ultramarathon or something. We manufacture these high-stakes, extreme scenarios because our baseline reality feels so dull.
But Interawong offers a sharp, philosophical critique of those extreme pursuits.
He argues that fabricated challenges are simply the byproduct of a bored, ravenous ego that needs to conquer something to feel special.
Sages, on the other hand, achieve true wisdom through root core activities.
They do not need to jump out of a perfectly good airplane to feel the terrifying reality of existence.
They feel it in the subtle shift of gravity when they sit down in a chair.
Exactly.
But practically speaking, how do we actually override the brain's habituation? Like, how do you sit in a chair and find it thrilling?
By bringing a terrifying, granular level of attention to the mechanics of the movement.
Walk me through it.
When you sit down, You do not just collapse your frame while staring at a screen. You isolate the sensation.
Okay.
You feel the exact microsecond your quadriceps engage to lower your weight. You feel the transfer of gravity from your feet to your pelvis.
You observe the change in your respiratory rate as your posture shifts.
And when you apply that level of microscopic attention, you realize a profound truth.
That you have never taken the exact same step twice.
You have never sat down in the exact same way twice in your entire life. Every single moment is unprecedented.
If you can train your mind to feel that level of awe for the simple act of sitting down, the text promises you become the most easily happy person in the world.
You do not need $1 million or an exotic vacation.
You just need a chair, a floor, and the discipline to pay attention.
It is the ultimate circumvention of the consumer mindset, but it requires an immense, almost martial level of mental discipline.
And this necessity for discipline leads us directly into the final phase of the roadmap, Part 5.
The way of the sword and the rhythms of nature.
Because eventually, we have to leave the chair. We have to engage with complex crises, execute tasks, and navigate the chaos of society.
We cannot just observe our breath while the house is burning down.
Right. So Interowong provides a masterclass on how to move through the world with a balance of lightning-fast execution and deep, immovable stillness. Point 9.
He introduces a practice called the sharp sword of the mind.
What's the core instruction here?
It relies on a crucial distinction found in many ancient spiritual traditions. You must actively practice separating the mind from the thoughts.
For the modern listener, that sounds like a contradiction. I mean, we assume our mind and our thoughts are the exact same entity. How do we separate them?
Think of your mind as the vast blue sky, and think of your thoughts as the clouds.
Okay.
The sky is a permanent, clear, unmoving container. The clouds are temporary weather patterns. They roll in, they get dark and stormy with anxiety, they turn light and fluffy with desire, and eventually they roll out.
And the ordinary person attaches their identity to the clouds. When it storms, they think they are the storm.
Exactly. But Interowong instructs us to anchor our identity in the sky. You are the silent awareness observing the weather.
Once you detach your core awareness from the fleeting panic or procrastination of your thoughts, you unlock a terrifying level of operational efficiency.
Because you bypass the internal debate entirely.
When action is required, the text tells us to act faster than discouragement, laziness, or desire can even set in.
And the author uses a deeply vivid martial metaphor here. He tells us to be a razor-sharp sword.
Draw the sword only when necessary, strike swiftly and decisively, and return the sword to the sheath immediately.
You strike faster than your own procrastination can convince you to hesitate?
And Interowong deliberately contrasts this silent, deadly efficiency with its opposite, doesn't he?
He warns the reader, do not be a cheap, noisy knife that makes threatening sounds but possesses no real cutting power.
Oh, we all know the noisy knife.
Oh, yeah.
It is the modern epidemic of performative busyness. It is the person who talks endlessly about the novel they are going to write or the gym routine they are starting tomorrow.
They complain loudly about their stress levels. They send emails at 2 a.m. to prove they are working.
They are vibrating with anxious energy, making threatening sounds. But when you look at their actual output, no deep, meaningful cuts have been made.
The noisy knife expends all of its kinetic energy on the thoughts about the work rather than the execution of the work itself.
But the sharp sword operates in total silence.
It rests in absolute stillness. When the email needs to be sent or the decision needs to be made, the sword is drawn, the reality is altered with precision, and the blade goes immediately back into the silent sheath.
This rapid return to stillness prevents greed and ego from creeping into the work. You do the task and you drop it.
But this brings up a massive apparent contradiction in the text, which is point 10.
Right, because the very next practice instructs us to surrender to the elements. The author tells us to live according to nature.
We are told to wake and sleep with the sun and moon, to listen to the silence and the wind, and to stop waging war with reality.
Wait, how do we reconcile this? We are commanded to be a hyper-efficient, lightning-fast assassin with our tasks, but simultaneously told to flow with the moon and listen to the grass grow.
It seems impossible, right?
Yeah, how do you marry radical execution with radical passivity?
They appear contradictory only to the ordinary mind. The awakened mind understands that they are two halves of the exact same physics equation.
Okay, break that down for me.
The hyper-efficiency of the strike is only made possible because of the deep, natural stillness.
The speed is born from the silence.
Look at apex predators in nature. A leopard does not sprint around the savannah for 12 hours a day stressing about its quarterly hunting metrics.
Right, it rests completely.
It surrenders to the heat of the afternoon. It flows with the natural rhythm of the environment.
But when the exact necessary moment arrives, the explosion of stored kinetic energy is staggering.
It draws the sword, it strikes, and it immediately returns to rest.
The noisy knife has no cutting power because it is constantly vibrating. It has depleted its reserves on performative anxiety.
And in Tarawong expands this idea of surrendering to nature to include our emotional reality as well.
He says we must learn to see the profound beauty in both boredom and ugliness, because both black and white are natural states.
The ordinary person wages a relentless war against the dark.
We medicate our sadness, we flee from our boredom with screens, we surgically alter our aging to hide from ugliness.
The author's guidance is to stop choosing. Do not aggressively pursue the light, and do not violently reject the dark.
Embrace the full spectrum of existence.
If you're ever confused about how to live, how much to eat, when to rest, how hard to work, stop looking at societal metrics or productivity blogs.
Look at a tree, look at an animal, listen to the wind.
Nature has already calculated the exact mathematical formula for balance. You just have to quiet your ego enough to hear it.
Which brings us to the culmination of this immense philosophical architecture, Part 6.
The ultimate evolution.
Because we have walked through a grueling, brutal training camp for the soul. We have systematically dismantled everything that makes us feel safe and important.
The ultimate question hovering over all of this is, why?
Why willingly subject ourselves to this excruciating level of psychological discomfort?
Tarawong answers this in his closing manifesto. He frames the entire text as a progressive resistance program.
Like hitting the gym.
This is literal weight training for your spirit. You don't just read these 10 practices and nod your head, you execute them.
And over time, you must gradually increase the weight and the intensity.
Exactly. If you started the practice of giving things away by donating a beloved book, eventually you must work up the strength to give away the heirloom watch.
If you started the practice of silence by biting your tongue during small talk, eventually you must hold your tongue when someone is actively assassinating your character in public.
You have to intentionally tear the muscle fibers of your ego in order to rebuild them stronger.
You increase the weight until the practices dissolve into your very nature, until they are no longer things you do, but simply who you are.
And the final argument the author makes is a haunting challenge to our identity as a species.
Like we established at the beginning, we are born Putu-chan. We are born ordinary.
We instinctively crave food. We aggressively hoard our possessions. We define ourselves by our enemies, and we suffocate under our Krunun masks.
But because we are human, we are not trapped by that instinct.
Exactly. Tarawong asks us to look closely at our lives and ask, why do we fight with such ferocity to protect our lowest potential?
Why do we fiercely defend the ego, guard our shiny objects, and wage petty wars to prove we are right when every single one of those victories is just an anchor dragging us back to the mud?
We defend the prison cell because we are terrified of the open sky.
Man. The author's ultimate challenge is to let the ordinary person die while you are still breathing, to drop the heavy suitcase of your identity entirely.
And to choose instead to live out your remaining days as an Arya-chan.
A noble, awakened person who has completely escaped the gravitational pull of the ego.
It is a breathtaking, terrifying vision for what a human life can actually be.
It really is. And it requires a radical, violent approach to every single minute of our day. So let's trace the arc of the journey one last time for everyone listening.
A quick recap.
To become noble, we must first trigger the collapse of our identity by giving away our most prized, panic-inducing possessions.
We must play games with our desires by turning down the promotions and the applause that the world uses to control us.
We must starve the ego by observing the agonizing machinery of hunger instead of medicating it with food.
We must filter our speech with ruthless precision, speaking only what is true and vitally useful, letting useless thoughts die in silence.
And from that silence, we step into the interpersonal fire. We actively serve the enemies we despise, exposing the fiction of our own hatred.
We reach up and rip off the heavy, suffocating con mask of social perfection, publicly broadcasting our flaws so they can never be used against us.
We take on the dirtiest, most despised labor to annihilate the ego's demand for status.
We train our minds with granular focus to find explosive novelty in the simple, mundane acts of walking and sitting down.
And finally, we forge the mind into a silent, razor-sharp sword. striking with devastating speed when necessary, and then returning immediately to the deep, immovable stillness of nature, accepting the dark and the light without resistance.
Day by day, we increase the resistance. We tear the muscle of the ordinary self over and over and over until the noble self is the only thing left standing.
This has been a phenomenal, structure-shattering text to explore. It completely upends the modern paradigm of, adding good habits and life hacks to our crowded lives.
Yeah, replacing it instead with a ruthless, beautiful process of total subtraction.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step away from this and back into the friction of your day.
Something to sit with.
Maybe as you are walking to your car or sitting down to a meal or looking at that one specific object on your shelf that you love just a little too much.
That Jenga block.
And Tara Wong asks us to systematically strip away every layer of our ordinary selves. But think deeply about this. If you successfully delete your prized possessions, if you filter out your defensive speech, if you dissolve your hatred for your enemies, and if you completely remove the heavy mask of your social identity,
What's left?
once the demolition is entirely finished, what exactly is the you that is left standing in the silence observing it all?
That is the only question that matters.
Good luck finding the answer. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.